Last week, I put into position the entirety of my Nintendo GameCube collection. Now, that was an absolutely great console. It struggled against the Sony PlayStation 2 and the original Microsoft Xbox, but I had a lot of love for what that machine could offer. And when Nintendo came out with their sequel, The Revolution, I wasn't quite taken at first. But then again, I didn't have the money to afford a PlayStation 3 or an Xbox 360 either. Both of them would be on my paycheck. I had friends outside the family who bought an Xbox 360, so I had access to play the games on that console. And then eventually, I came across at a friend's house a copy of the game Wii Sports. It was so vibrant, it was so different, it was so unlike anything I'd seen before, and it made me want to get back into console gaming after a little break. So, now to complete the collection, after doing the Sega Mega Drive and Dreamcast and GameCube and handheld consoles, we're going to start to unpack the Wii U collection. Now, I'm going to start up here in the middle for space reasons, as will become clear soon. But the first title, if we do my Wii collection alphabetically, it begins with what is, I believe, honestly, one of the worst video games I've ever played. The Wii version of Alone in the Dark. All I can say is, I gave up halfway through, I tried again sometime later, and I didn't even get as far as I did the first time. It was a really difficult and atrocious game, and one day I'll try it again, but I just had a lot of problems with it. Alphabetically, next up I have the Beatles Rock Band. I've got quite a few Beatles rock band or Guitar Hero style games for this console. This is the rhythm game genre that really swept the nation over that time period and had a lot of fun. Then I have what I still believe is one of the best games Rockstar have ever put out, Bully Scholarship Edition. It was a pretty solid port to the Wii. Pretty much the entirety of the game comes through quite well. It was very fun to play. It's got all of the traditional old school Grand Theft Auto style mechanics, but set in a school round in a small cut-off town. Pretty good. One of the weirdest games for the Wii, and one that I haven't completed but for slightly different reasons, is Curse Mountain. Now, I have played about 90, maybe 85-90% of this game. Unfortunately, I hit a point where it saved. And when it saves, it also records your health, and it saved just before the beginning of an encounter that I went into with practically no health. It was really annoying because I replayed, I looked at guides, I tried to see what I was meant to do, and it turned out I was just meant to have more health, but there was no way of going back and refreshing. So I had to give up on this title because I wasn't going to replay it from the start again to miss out. And that was a shame because it's a really, really solid horror title. Something very different. It's not a shooter like Resident Evil. This one is just ghosts on a mountain. Then I have one of the, also a very odd Wii title, but for completely different reasons. Call of Duty Modern Warfare for the Wii didn't come out at the same time as Call of Duty Modern Warfare on other consoles. Modern Warfare, when it came out, was a fantastic game. It built a reputation. But it came out on the PS3 and the 360, which were much more powerful consoles. So this was a demake, a downgrade, in technically visual terms, but the gameplay was magnificent. The missions, the multiplayer, was all there. The one thing that I missed when I picked it up was the instruction that if you held your Wii remote pointing down, it had gyro controls and would interpret that to mean you should crouch. For long periods of time when playing this game, I'd find my player moving slowly. I just couldn't run. I was trying to work out what was going on. It was only after I'd finished the campaign I discovered that was me pointing down with the Wii controller when I was playing it and meaning that I was accidentally crawling when I should have been running. It made the game a lot more difficult than it had any right to be. Next up, I have Epic Mickey. Now, a lot of people were very disappointed in this title when it came out, but I think it's a pretty solid platform. There's a very definitive line about what it is and what it's not. But I think that comes down to expectations. Anyway, I'm going to draw a line there and I'm going to switch over to this next container. I'll leave those ones in there and I'll explain why later. Next up, we have Ghost Squad. Now this is what the Wii Pointer was made for. It's an arcade on-rails shooter where, depending on how accurate you are or choices you make on which targets you prioritise, the scenarios all play out slightly differently. It's got only a couple of different scenarios. I think there's only 3 or 4 of them, but they're quite fun to play through, quite quick, a lot of things to discover, a lot of inventiveness. I would highly recommend this as a budget title. Let's put that there. Next up, we have the Wii remake of GoldenEye. Another very odd title. The Nintendo 64 release of GoldenEye, which was developed by Rare, is one of the most famous video games of all time. And unfortunately, because Nintendo sold off Rare and also lost the James Bond 007 franchise, it was for a long time almost seemed impossible we'd ever get that remake. But eventually Nintendo reached out and they commissioned another party to essentially make a new GoldenEye game. It doesn't even attempt to be the same as the original. But yeah, it was a pretty competent first-person shooter that eventually made its way to consoles. Then we have the rhythm games. Guitar Hero 3, Legends of Rock, which I think was my favourite of the series, followed by Guitar Hero 4 World Tour, which brings in the rock bar style, drums and microphone for singing. I had a lot of fun playing those games with friends and family with parties. But I had one more, potentially the Metallica version of the game. Like the Beatles one, it's not purely restricted to Metallica songs. It says there on the cover, over 20 guest acts. But it's a really strong selection of metal and softer but kind of leading to an intensity level of music, which I really respect. That was a pretty good game. Then we have 2 Lego games that were sold, not sold as a double pack, but they essentially are a double pack. Lego Harry Potter Years 1 to 4 and 5 to 7. The Lego games, well, they are all pretty much the same, to be honest. They are very consistent in terms of their controls and level design and replayability. Really, you're just stuck on the franchise you like if you want to play them. And Harry Potter wasn't my favourite, to be honest. I quite like the Harry Potter franchise, but I don't have that strong affection for it. Link's Crossbow Training, the pointer. So this took the assets from Twilight Princess and remodeled them so that you essentially had a on-rail shooter experience through the Legend of Zelda overworld. It has some really nice ideas, but it's unfortunately just a little bit too short and too light an experience for my taste. And now I have what I believe to be one of the strongest game discs in existence. I have the Metroid Prime trilogy. This is a compilation of both Metroid Prime 1 and 2, which were originally released for the Nintendo GameCube, packaged together with Metroid Prime 3, a Wii exclusive that I missed when it first came out. But when I heard they were packaging up the trilogy, all 3 games together, with upgrades on the controls for the first 2 games, I knew I had to have. And that is one of the strongest and most important releases Nintendo have ever made from my perspective. And give me a second, I'll need to go and fetch the next one because it unfortunately is by no means one of the strongest and most important games Nintendo's ever made. It's almost the exact opposite. And then we have Metroid Other M. Oh, this game is not a brilliant game, and its reputation tarnishes it for so many reasons. The problem is not the story, although it is the pacing of the story. The concept's fine. It is an issue the way it degrades Samus's character, and the gameplay and the plot really do not tie together well in that respect. But for me, the ultimate problem with the pacing, there are points in the game where it just makes you stop and look around. It's essentially trying to make you play detective mode. You're looking for something which is a clue to tell you how to proceed. I literally spent 5 minutes pointing the Wii remote around in different places. You can miss the object or the definitive thing that you're supposed to be pointing the remote at by just a few pixels and it won't register. I had to look up online, it said point at this building, and I was pointing at the building and it wouldn't pick up. There's just some really bizarre design choices. It wasn't flawed in concept, it's the execution that really let this down. The sideways way it demanded you play the Wii remote, cutting out optionality, cutting out accessibility, cutting out people's desire to want to replay the game. It's no wonder it went for so cheap just a few months after it was released. Not as good a game as that though. Metroid Other M probably is a better game than Monopoly Streets. This was bought by a family member for a Christmas game. We played it once. We completed one board game, then we put it in the disc never to play again. Yeah. Board games and video games are 2 different things. Usually it's better when they're treated that way. Slightly more happy with this title. This is Mirazmaza, the Demon Blade. It's a really fantastic hack and slash platformer. If you want a 2D game adventure, I would really recommend this one as worth your time to check out. So yeah, the art style is really, really unique. The story's quite engrossing as well. And you play as two separate characters. It annoys me sometimes when games make you replay as two separate characters to experience the whole thing, but that one just about got away with it. And then, one of the most iconic Wii games, possibly largely because it's one of the only mature ones that really took the console's unique properties seriously. No More Heroes. There's a lot of fun to be had with this one, I don't need to say much more. Next we have one of the most disappointing games on the Wii, full stop for me. Knights was the game of the Sega Saturn for a lot of people. It was what Sonic Team believed would be their next mascot character and allow them to move on from the Blue Hedgehog. And the fate of Knights seemed inexorably tied up with the Sega Saturn. There wasn't a sequel on the Dreamcast. It felt like this might be the end of the Purple Jester. When he came out on the Wii, I'd heard so much about how fantastic Knights was on the Saturn. I expected so much from this game, and it's not a bad game, it's not awful, it was just lackluster. I couldn't see, from playing this game for the first time, why people had raved about the first one so much. Now I've experienced the first one, maybe I ought to go back and replay it. Next we have, skipping from N to the letter P, one of the latter Wii games, Pandora's Tower. I've already done a very short video on this. I absolutely adored Pandora's Tower. I fell into it with Operation Rainfall. This was one of 3 RPG games that was brought to Europe, and there was a massive effort to try and get it taken to America because there was a very real possibility this and one other or 2 other very important games wouldn't have made it over there. And I'm so glad they did, because I don't think Ganbarian have done many other independent new original titles, and this shows they've got a lot of potential. Another famous Wii game, the Wii birthed us Rayman's Raving Rabbids. Yeah, I actually quite like the first Raving Rabbids, but it did not need to become a franchise with annualised sequels. I just want the original Rayman back, really. Then, possibly I've yet to play the VR version that's now out, but the Wii version of Resident Evil 4 is, at the time of release, the definitive version of the way to play this game. The Wii pointer, allowing you to control exactly where you shoot, gave a level of precision and accuracy to this title that I absolutely adored. And I've already spoken at length on other people's channels about how I think Resident Evil 4 is one of the best paced action horror games out. A relatively new addition to the collection, Samba de Amigo. I missed out on the original on the Dreamcast, I think, so I was really keen to pick it up and try it out with the Wii remotes. It's fun, it's bizarre, it's a rhythm game, but it's got some pretty unique twists to it. Then we are getting to the Sega franchises. So before we go Sonic as Sonic, we have Sonic as Sega. This was a reinterpretation of Wii Sports Tennis Mode, but upgraded, and I went back and forth on whether I preferred the original Wii Tennis or whether I preferred this one. The advantage of this one is it gave you the ability to control and move your character around the pitch, but then you actually still hit the racket the same way you do Wii Sports by swinging the Wii remote. Had a lot of fun to it, a lot of good stuff going on here, and the ability to choose between loads of different Sega franchise mascots was a really fun concept. Probably an underrated gem for the system. Next, okay, let's see how many we can fit onto this shelf. This game has been re-released on the PlayStation 4 and the new Xbox consoles. There's a lot of issues with that. It sounds like they're patching the worst of them out, but I had so much love for the Wii original. It did so many things right that I'm nervous to go into the new versions until they've solved the problems. So that's a tentative. Really happy I've got that in my collection. Then there's a lot of hate for Sonic and the Secret Rings. It's got weird controls. You hold the Wii remote sideways and you tilt forwards to go run fast, and you tilt backwards to run slow or brake. Which I think the controls put a lot of people off. If you put the time into it, there's a really fantastic, fun little side game here. But I do accept that it requires investment, and the one thing Sonic should never be is unintuitive. If you've got to learn to get good, then the game is doing something very, very wrong. And another game that you had to learn to get good was Sonic and the Black Knight. I've got less patience and time for this one, just because I really didn't enjoy the sword mechanic, but I know other people do actually quite like that one. Then, the Wii port of Sonic Unleashed is much maligned by many people who treasure the PS3 and Xbox 360 version. But this was the original way I played the game, and it's not that bad. It was fine. It's not as good as Sonic Colors, but it was the daytime levels and the nighttime levels were both fun to mess around, and there was much less obnoxious medals preventing you from accessing future areas of the game. Then we have Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. They switched it around here. Whereas the tennis game was Sega Superstars, this was Sonic and Sega, starting the trend which the third game will come to a little bit later in this video, continued with Sonic really taking the limelight in front of the other Sega mascot characters. Yes, it's a Mario Kart clone, but it's a very, very efficient Mario Kart clone, and it laid the groundworks for one of the best racing sequel games in all of gaming. Then we have, it's not the original, it's the original 2 upgraded LEGO Star Wars games. I don't know if the LEGO franchise has ever done better than it did with these ones. There's a reason that the franchise took off, because these games were fantastic and they did some awesome things. Yeah, I'm really nice, happy addition to the collection. Star Wars The Clone Wars. This was bought second hand a few years later. It's the lightsaber duels. The idea of swinging the Wii remote around as a lightsaber to engage in duels, it's a nice concept, but it's very, very difficult to get. Then we have probably the most famous Wii game of them all, after Wii Sports, Super Mario Galaxy. I own that too many times to count now. I own it on the Wii, I later bought the Wii U download, and now I've got it on the Switch. Spoilers. I also have Super Mario Galaxy 2. I prefer the second. I understand a lot of people prefer the first. It doesn't matter, they're both awesome. Super Paper Mario. Some people think this is where the Paper Mario franchise started to lose its way. I really adored it as a platform game. There's a lot of good stuff there. Then we have Super Smash Bros. Brawl. So I had Melee on the GameCube. That was almost the game that got me into the Nintendo franchise. Brawl was another excellent entry, and it's the one that introduced Sonic into the mix, so I can't complain. Weird one, probably not in many people's collection, The Adventures of Tintin. I had a lot of respect for the Steven Spielberg movie that came out. It uses a slightly weird art style, if you can see there, but this was a really inoffensive, it was fun to play through, didn't have much depth, 2D platformer with some puzzles in it. Yeah, that was an interesting one to play through, got it cheap. This is another one of the Operation Rainfall games, The Last Story. This is made by the guy who originally kicked off the Final Fantasy franchise. It's a bit of an action RPG. The story is quite deep and emotional. I'd say it's got some big pacing issues, but I do really, really like it. And I'd like to see it re-released. Same for Pandora's Tower, they both deserve to be brought to modern consoles. Then we have Twilight Princess. I bought it for the GameCube when it came out, and a few years later when it started to turn up at cheaper prices, I bought it again for the Wii. It's just a really solid Zelda. Slightly more maligned is Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. This required the Wii Motion Plus to do almost anything. And I absolutely adored playing it through, but I can see why other people really took a negative reaction to that. Then we have Tomb Raider Anniversary. After playing all of the original Tomb Raider games on PC, and then Legend on the GameCube, this was the one that really sold me on Tomb Raider on consoles. It took the Legend control scheme and it took the Legend formula, but it then applied that to a much larger, much wider, much more open game. Yeah, there were some changes from the original I didn't like, but overall, it's the first Tomb Raider game I completed 100% without using any cheat codes. I think that says something. Then I was far less impressed with Tomb Raider Underworld. I gather this one I really should have played the HD version of. I should have played it on a more powerful console or PC, and I do intend to go back and rectify that problem soon. few more games in the Wii collection. We're getting towards the end of the alphabet, and the last of the Operation Rainfall games. This is the game that Nintendo of America didn't believe would sell. This is the game that Nintendo of America didn't believe anyone wanted. So Nintendo of Europe handled the localization process. It had a British cast, a British set of voice actors, and it made it feel unique, it made it feel fresh, it made it feel vibrant. But even without that, with different voice actors, this would have been a fantastic game. Xenoblade Chronicles was one of the definitive role-playing games of that generation, and the re-release on the Switch just brings it to a whole new audience. It's well deserved. What else can we fit on this shelf? Well, it didn't come with a box originally, but I managed to print out a cover case for it a few years later. Wii Sports. This is the game that came with the Nintendo Wii. This is the one that sold people on waggle controls. Bowling and tennis was awesome. Golf I could take or leave. Baseball, as far as I was concerned, was broken, and I had little interest in boxing. But just for the tennis and the bowling, that was a stellar experience. There was a sequel, Wii Sports Resort. And yeah, I've got a lot of time for Wii Sports Resort. I bought the Motion Plus quite late into the Wii's life cycle. Pretty much bought it for Skyward Sword. So I did play around with Sports Resort, but the magic of motion controls was definitely gone at this point. I also purchased Wii Fit Plus when they improved on the original Wii Fit game. The balance board is actually one of the best selling scales in history. And yeah, it works for that game. No other game that tried to use the balance board ever really justified it. It's a very expensive game for that one peripheral. But I'm glad I enjoyed it. And I feel a bit sad actually. There's been some absolutely fantastic Wii games here, from A to Wii. And I'm really sad that I'm ending it on this. It's not a travesty. There's nothing wrong with Wii Play, and there's nothing exciting about it either. This was designed to be sold alongside an extra Wii remote for people who wanted to play multiplayer games. And that's fine. It's a pack-in game. It's a tie-in. It's just designed to show you that the Wii remotes can be used in some interesting and innovative ways. Is it interesting? Not really. It's fun for about half an hour, and then you move on with your life. But that's it. That is the Nintendo Free Focus, Nintendo GameCube, and then Wii collection on the shelves. And we've left a gap fairly deliberately here, because we're going to fill it with what many people would consider Nintendo's biggest failure. So, if you wondered why I left the space on the far left of the Wii games, which stretch all the way across there, it's because I have a much smaller collection for the next Nintendo console. It's not that I didn't play much on the Wii U. I actually really liked my Wii U. The problem with it is this is when Nintendo started to go digital. And yeah, I didn't expect to, but I bought far less Wii games physically. What I bought was a lot of smaller games digitally. I tended to keep the large games physical. And these were Batman Arkham City. So I had briefly played Arkham Asylum on the PS3. Only briefly, I'd not played the whole story. But I really enjoyed Arkham City. Then next up we have Darksiders 2. And I think this was a big problem. Both these games kind of represent a big problem for the Wii U. With Nintendo entering HD, it meant a lot of other game manufacturers could bring their games to the Wii, but they weren't. They were all carrying on series that had begun on other consoles. So you have the second Batman game, the second Darksiders game. The one that really killed it for me when I never bought it, and the reason I never bought it was when EA bought Mass Effect 3 across. And when this is a story-driven trilogy where your choices in the first two games affects the third game, it was a very odd decision. Why didn't they bring across Mass Effect 1 and 2? Well, I sort of consoled myself and thought, okay, well maybe they'll bring across Mass Effect 1 and 2 at a later date, and they'll sell it as a trilogy. And that would have been sensible, apart from almost to the same month, AF's Mass Effect 3 came out on the Wii U, Mass Effect the Trilogy Edition came out on the PS3 and the Xbox consoles, and didn't come to the Wii U. And then EA criticised the Wii U for not selling enough copies of a game they butchered by their own announcement. Why do you bring only the latter half of a series to a console? It didn't make sense. And of course people flocked away. This one we did get the original one actually. Deus Ex Human Revolution Director's Cut. Again, a bit of controversy here though. This was announced originally as a Wii U exclusive, and then after outcry of people on other consoles, it was brought this way. And that's not a bad thing. I'm never going to push and say that non-console manufactured games should be exclusive. But yeah, no, I'm very, very glad I got to play the original Deus Ex. Deus Ex, second original Deus Ex, of course, because there are two old Deus Ex games, but Human Revolution, fantastic game. Then, I have criticised Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze in other videos. I've said that Nintendo Rare made some mistakes, and I'd say largely in the marketing and design and sales of it. In terms of game design, this is an absolutely fantastic title, but it's not the game people wanted Rare to be making, and I don't think there's any getting around from that problem. Then, I think it's misunderstood. I absolutely adored LEGO Dimensions. I have a lot of time for that title and the releases that came out afterwards. A game where you can play as Doctor Who and Sonic the Hedgehog and Ghostbusters and Batman and Gandalf and so many other characters at the same time. It's fantastic. I love it. I'm going to keep playing it forever. Then we have, again, another of Nintendo's blunders in terms of their marketing and judging. I actually really like Nintendo Lite, but if they wanted it to be a success, they should have packed it in with the console. This again was their arrogance of saying, yeah, if they wanted people to understand what the Wii gamepad was capable of, they should have sold this with it. It doesn't make sense without it. Next up, this is absolutely one of my favourite games of all time. It could be one of my favourite games in the Sonic franchise. Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed is a Mario Kart beater. I said before that I thought Sonic and All-Stars Racing was a good game. It was a fantastic game. But this one was just absolutely mind-blowing. And I remember a little bit of controversy because it was announced about the same time as Mario Kart 7, which also had the transform feature. But this game blew Mario Kart 7 out of the water. That DS game was really limited in what you could get away with the hang gliding and the submarine water boat thingies that it just never really felt natural. But this game, the boats, the flying, the cars, it's all perfect. Then the original Splatoon. Nintendo taking on Battlefield and Call of Duty with their own spin on the first-person shooter franchise. If Pikmin was Nintendo does strategy, this is Nintendo does first-person shooter, and they did it fantastic. I'm not surprised the sequel's on the Switch so immensely well. I have a lot of time for Super Mario 3D World. I think it's a really fun title, and the final boss is a stroke of genius. But it's mad. It's absolutely mad. And I think a lot of people won't get the humour in it. Super Smash Bros. For Wii U. Definitely a step up over the Wii game, which I enjoyed in itself, so this was a fantastic title. The lack of the story mode, however, I think in my eyes did hurt it, and that weird game board thing I had absolutely no time for. And then the Wii U turned into something of a Zelda re-release from, so you've got the Wind Waker HD. It looks like we're running out here, but actually it will fit quite snugly. And then we have Twilight Princess HD. I bought and I played both of them, they were pretty fantastic. 2 games to go. The original sequel to Xenoblade Chronicles was Xenoblade Chronicles X, and I adored this game. It's open world, it's fun, but the story is lacking, and that really was what I got into the Xenoblade franchise for. And then I've already given away what this last game is, Zombie U. Ubisoft's console selling, or not console selling, I think is the problem. Yeah, horror game. It's got a lot of really good stuff going for it, but it's not a console seller. And you notice the game I don't have? I got Pikmin 3 digitally, and I think that's a travesty. But saving that, there's my Wii U collection. So this next shelf, I've put the only 2 amiibo I own. I bought the Link one to play with Smash Brothers, and the Wolf Midna came with Twilight Princess HD. And I'm putting this on shelf to go alongside my Nintendo Switch games because, again, modern console, a lot of my purchases are digital. So what do I have for Nintendo's? I'm now going beyond the realms of retro games. This is current, this is modern, there's nothing Nintendo-wise newer than the Switch, but it's not a console I have plugged into the TV anymore. It doesn't need to be plugged into the TV downstairs, of course, but it is what it is. First game for that is the Crash Insane trilogy. It's absolutely fantastic. I've played it on the Switch and the PS4 and the PS5. And even though it's got a little bit more fidelity on the PlayStation consoles, it still plays absolutely fantastic on the Switch. Then I have Diablo 3. I've played this... adjust the lighting there. I've played this on the PC and on the Switch, and it runs absolutely fine on the Switch. And in fact, I did a multiplayer run through online co-op last year, which was absolutely brilliant. Then, with the exception of the accidentally bought on eBay Phantom Hourglass copy, this is the only other non-European international game I have. Why? Because when Square Enix decided to bring Final Fantasy X and X2 HD Remastered to the Switch in Europe, they decided to put Final Fantasy X on the cartridge and leave X2 as an optional download, which is something I find absolutely abhorrent. So of course I was going to import it when I learned that the Asian copy had both games on the cartridge. It's what you want, it's what you need. I'm not paying for a box that just has a code in it for the game I paid for. You can just buy from the storefront. There's no point in a box if there's nothing inside it. Anyway, Final Fantasy X, as I said, was the game that got me into the Final Fantasy franchise, so owning this in a slightly more HD zooped up version, absolutely adored. And then the Switch re-release of Final Fantasy XII was another game I had to get a copy of because I absolutely adore Final Fantasy XII in all of its forms. Next up we have... So, this was my first Fire Emblem game since the one on the GameCube, and I'm so glad I got back into it. Three Houses really appeared to be a return to form for the franchise, and I've played through it twice. I really need to do the third house. Then Mario & Rabbids Kingdom Valley Battle, a game that when it was announced no one wanted, and then the moment people played, everyone wanted. I can completely see why. It was a really fun experience. Then, I've waxed lyrical about it before. I adore Metroid Dread. I think it's absolutely fantastic. So, in goes that. Then we have, divisive, Pokemon Sword, Dexit, in the same year as Brexit. Yeah, that really was a year for dividing communities. Super Mario 3D All-Stars. I almost promised myself not to buy this one, and then I gave in. I'm weak. Nintendo have taken me for a fool. I'm still... two problems with this. The timed release when it came out, meaning it would be removed from storefront or digital storefronts just 6 months after it's initially announced. And where's Super Mario Galaxy 2? But apart from that, this was a really nice way to play Super Mario 64, and also I'd never played Sunshine before. I bought this for Sunshine. I don't regret that. Then we come to Super Mario Odyssey. Absolutely fantastic game. I don't think I need to say any more than that. It's really fantastic. I think these will be a little bit predictable. Super Smash Brothers. I've put a lot of time into this. Don't play online so much, but multiplayer co-op and the single player World of Light adventure, probably sunk over 100 hours into fairly easily. Then the game that came with the Switch for me, this was the system seller, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Its reputation is well deserved, is I think all I need to say. Well, this is a special one. I got the Wonderful 101 digitally on the Wii U. I enjoyed it. And when I heard that Platinum were considering re-releasing it, now the light is doing some funny things for this holographic cover. When I heard Platinum were re-releasing it, I thought, yeah, that sounds something I'd really like to get own physically. And then when it arrived, I got really upset because I was stung by import charges. I had to pay a lot of extra money to get the box of this imported into the UK because they didn't pay for shipping. So I actually had pretty mixed feelings about that when it arrived. But playing through it, yeah, it's not a brilliant, but it's a fair remaster. It's pretty much the same as it was in the Wii U, but it was good the first time round. So then the re-release of Xenoblade Chronicles, the definitive edition. I don't mind the changed art style. I think I can see why they changed it. It's still the same story, the same game though. And then the game I've put the most time into on the Nintendo Switch. Xenoblade Chronicles 2. It's divisive. The opening of the game is terrible. I think the first 3 chapters really put me off. Really put me off. This game does a horrible job of explaining itself and introducing itself. Once you got past that, once I'd unlocked everything, once I'd figured out where the story was going, once I'd figured out how it all fitted together, this opens up into something absolutely fantastic. The gameplay loop, the mechanics, it all fits together brilliantly. I absolutely hate the gacha unlocking event. Trying to get the last of the blades was just a nightmare, but the core gameplay, the battling, the story, the unlock, the side quests, I adored it. And so there we have my physical Nintendo Switch self. But alas, most of the games I have for that console are digital now. And I think we're going to see a similar trend for this last shelf. So I put my PlayStation 1 titles on the right, and I'll put my PlayStation 4 titles on the left. I don't own personally myself anything for the PlayStation 2 and 3. As I said, I had family members who owned that console, but I did purchase a PlayStation 4. And on that, I absolutely adored Divinity Original Sin 2. I played through this both in single player and an online co-op version. In fact, my first experience with this was online co-op. And this game probably does online co-op better than anything else I've seen in a story role-playing game. It's fantastic. The 2016 re-release of Doom is a really solid game. I don't need to say any more. It's Doom, but it's on modern consoles. I got secondhand the light's doing weird things there, a cheap copy of Fallout 4. Got a lot of time for Fallout. Fallout 4 is not the best game in the franchise, but it's by no means a terrible game. Then we have... I bought a copy of FIFA so that people could come round, and if you live in the United Kingdom and you have friends, probably who are male, who like playing video games, they probably mean they like playing FIFA. I purchased this second hand for 50p, purely on the off chance. I purchased it in 2019 thinking people will come round and they'll want to play FIFA. And then COVID happened and nobody came round. So I've never played it. One day I will, when people want to come round again. Oh, this box is horrible. This is the first physical game I bought for the PlayStation 4. Again, I bought it second hand. And they ruined the box out with stickers. I will have to take them off at some point. Bad CEX. But it's Final Fantasy 15. I had to see where the Final Fantasy franchise was going. I'm not particularly... It's got some good points. It's definitely better than Final Fantasy 13, but I wasn't particularly impressed by it. Final Fantasy 7 Remake, much prefer. Then, this release of Kingdom Hearts, the story so far, has everything up to Final Fantasy 3. It doesn't contain Final Fantasy 3, but it had everything before that, with the exception of the mobile games and the DS games. So I'm glad I managed to recover my DS boxes. But I have still unopened, still unwrapped. My plan was to replay through all of the original games in the series and the story so far, and then play Final Fantasy 3. And it's a mammoth undertaking. One day I will get to that. Then we have, again, this was purchased cheap and second hand because it's got a very difficult reputation. Mass Effect Andromeda nearly killed the Mass Effect franchise because of its reputation, because its sales, because there were a lot of problems with this game. I think it's worthy talking about its own right. Buying it for 50p, was it value for money? Yeah, I've had a fantastic time. I think if I'd paid £60 or £70 for it at launch, though, I would have been pretty peeved. Then, this is an absolutely fantastic title. More people should play the Nier games. Nier Automata, again, it's hack and slash, it's brilliant. This game I only bought, I'd already played it digitally, and I've released a video telling you how much I adored Persona 5. I managed to see, however, secondhand a steelbook. So the original disc is inside this metal steelbook. So when I saw that going cheap in a second-hand shop, I thought, yeah, I really would be nice to have that sort of collector's edition on the shelf, although I know it's out of date. There's an update in Persona 5 Royal that I don't own. One day I'll play. And then the final physical PS4 game is Spider-Man. This was given to me as a present at least a year after it came out, and it's a really, really good title. So that's the PS4. It's no longer a current game, so I can just about justify that as retro, although I know I can't the Nintendo Switch. So I currently have downstairs a PlayStation 5. I still have my Nintendo Switch in the house. I also have all my other old consoles. But if I take a few steps back, hopefully you'll get an idea of what this retro video games collection is looking like. We've got the Wii U and the Wii games at the top, followed by the Switch and GameCube, PS5, PS1, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, Dreamcast, and then Sega Mega Drive and PC. Absolutely brilliant collection. I'm honoured to have managed to amass these over the game, and the majority of them are pretty fantastic. I've been lucky. It's nice to have them all out on display for once. This is a new experience for me. Looks really good. Anyway, if you've listened to me wittering on, that's probably reviewing over maybe 100 video games, and I don't know how long this video is going to be when I've edited it all together. Thank you for listening. Thank you for enjoying. If anything that I've shown in these last two videos takes your interest, if you want to know more about any of these games, I don't restrict myself to doing deep dives on things that I own physical copies of. I've got Steam, I've got digital downloads. If I can access a game in any way, I'm more than happy to do a deep dive and a retrospective on it. But if anything mentioned in these videos takes your interest, I'd request it. Put in the comments. I would look in greater depth at any one of these videos, any one of these games again, in a heartbeat. Even the ones that annoyed me at the time. It would take a lot of time and energy for me to go back and revisit Alone in the Dark.